The storm had been merciless for 3 days, turning the mountain roads into rivers of mud and forcing even the most experienced hikers to seek emergency shelter. Deep in the Cascade Wilderness, an old hunting cabin sat abandoned, its windows boarded shut for nearly a decade. That's where Eman found him, a rain-soaked stranger huddled in the corner, surrounded by torn floorboards and scattered dirt. But Eman wasn't just any park ranger. 20 years as a federal investigator had taught him to recognize fear when he saw it, and this man wasn't afraid of getting caught trespassing. He was terrified of what he'd found beneath those rotting planks. The hole in the floor revealed something that made Eman's blood run cold, evidence of crimes that weren't supposed to exist, connected to names that could destroy careers and end lives. Now, with the stranger missing and Eman holding proof of unspeakable acts, the question isn't who will believe him. It's whether he'll live long enough to tell anyone. What exactly did that desperate man uncover in the darkness below? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eman crouched beside the jagged hole, his flashlight beam cutting through the musty darkness below. The wooden planks lay scattered like broken bones around the cabin's interior, testament to someone's desperate excavation. Rain drummed against the roof with increasing fury, but inside, an unnatural silence had settled over everything. The stranger had vanished while Eman radioed for backup, disappeared into the storm as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Only the evidence remained, wrapped in deteriorating plastic and duct tape, buried 3 feet beneath what should have been nothing more than an old hunting lodge. Photographs, dozens of them, their edges curled with age but their subjects still horrifyingly clear. Eman's trained eye catalogued the faces automatically, even as his stomach churned. Young faces, too young, and behind them, in carefully composed shots that spoke of professional photography rather than amateur documentation, stood figures he recognized from newspaper headlines and political rallies. A manila envelope beneath the photos contained documents that made his hands shake. Bank records, transfer receipts, flight manifests dating back 15 years, names that belonged to senators, judges, and business leaders whose influence stretched from Seattle to Washington, D.C., all connected by a web of transactions that painted a picture too monstrous to comprehend. Eman sat back on his heels, mind racing. This wasn't random. The cabin's location, 40 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by hiking trails that most people never discovered. Someone had chosen this place specifically. A dead drop, maybe, or long-term storage for evidence that could topple governments. His radio crackled with static. "Ranger Hayes, what's your status? Weather's getting worse. We might not be able to reach you until morning." Eman hesitated before responding. Protocol demanded he report everything immediately, but 20 years of investigating corruption had taught him caution. If these documents were authentic, if even half of what they suggested was true, then reporting through normal channels could be signing his own death warrant. "Copy that, dispatch." Trespasser fled the scene. "I'll secure the cabin and hike out at first light." He clicked off before they could respond, then carefully photographed every document with his personal phone, creating digital copies that he immediately uploaded to an encrypted cloud account. The originals he rewrapped and returned to their hiding place, then arranged the floorboards to appear undisturbed. As he worked, questions multiplied in his mind. Who was the stranger, and how had he known to look beneath those specific boards? Had he been searching randomly, or did he possess information about the cabin's secrets? Most troubling of all, if this evidence had been hidden here for years, who else knew about it? Thunder crashed overhead, and for a moment the darkness seemed absolute. When his vision adjusted, Eman noticed something that made his pulse quicken. Fresh tire tracks in the mud outside, visible through gaps in the boarded windows. Someone else had been here recently, someone with 4-wheel drive capable of navigating the treacherous mountain roads. The stranger hadn't stumbled onto this place by accident. He'd been led here, or followed here, or both, which meant Eman might not be alone in these woods after all. He moved to the window and peered through a crack in the boards. The The storm created a shifting curtain of darkness beyond the glass, but somewhere in that maze of trees and shadows, he sensed movement, a flash of light that could have been lightning, or could have been something else entirely. Eamon checked his weapon and backed away from the window. His truck was parked a mile down the trail, but reaching it meant crossing open ground where he'd be completely exposed. The smart play was to wait for backup, but if those documents contained what he thought they did, backup might not be coming at all. Outside, a branch snapped with a sound too sharp and deliberate to be natural. Eamon killed his flashlight and pressed himself against the cabin wall, listening to the storm and wondering how many secrets these mountains held, and how many people were willing to kill to keep them buried. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like ghostly fingers as Ranger Eamon guided his truck down the narrow dirt road toward Blackwood Cabin. Coffee steam fogged his windshield while he mentally catalogued what he knew. Anonymous tip called in yesterday evening reporting lights and movement at the supposedly empty structure. Probably teenagers looking for a place to party, or maybe a transient seeking shelter from the October chill. He'd driven this route 100 times over his 15 years patrolling the Cascade National Forest, but something felt different today. The usual morning chorus of birds seemed muted, and even the squirrels appeared skittish, darting between trees with unusual urgency. Eamon had learned to trust his instincts in the wilderness. They'd saved his life more than once during his army tours in Afghanistan before he'd traded his combat boots for ranger gear. The cabin materialized through the pine trees like a scene from a forgotten photograph. Built in the 1940s by some long-dead lumber baron, it had sat abandoned for the better part of 2 decades after the last owner died intestate. The Forest Service had been trying to figure out what to do with the property ever since, trapped in a legal maze of bureaucratic red tape. Eamon parked 50 yards away following protocol. His radio crackled with morning chatter from other rangers checking in across the forest. He grabbed his flashlight, pepper spray, and the digital camera, standard kit for documenting trespassing incidents that might end up in court. The front door hung open at an odd angle, its rusty hinges protesting silently in the breeze. Fresh boot prints marked the muddy ground leading to the entrance, size 11 or 12 from the look of them. Heavy tread pattern, possibly work boots. Eamon photographed the prints before following them up the sagging wooden steps. "Hello, Forest Service," he called out, hand resting on his radio. No response came from within the cabin's dark interior. Stepping inside, Eamon's flashlight beam swept across a scene of deliberate destruction. This wasn't random vandalism or kids looking for thrills. Someone had systematically torn apart the cabin's interior with surgical precision. Furniture lay overturned but not smashed, cushions sliced open, and their contents examined rather than scattered. Cabinet doors hung open, their contents neatly stacked on nearby surfaces. This was a search operation. His beam found the real focal point in the cabin's main room. A section of floorboards had been pried up with considerable effort. The wood showed fresh tool marks, and several boards lay stacked against the far wall. Someone had known exactly where to dig. Eamon knelt beside the hole and aimed his flashlight into the space beneath the floor. The beam illuminated disturbed earth and something metallic catching the light. He pulled out his camera and took several photos before reaching down to retrieve what appeared to be a small metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox but heavier than expected. The container was old but well maintained, with a simple latch mechanism that opened easily under his fingers. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a collection of items that made Eamon's pulse quicken: photographs, documents, and what looked like a leather-bound ledger. Even in the dim light, he could see names and dates written in careful handwriting across yellowed pages. The photographs showed men in expensive suits shaking hands with others Eamon didn't recognize, but the background suggested logging operations, construction sites, and what might have been government buildings. The documents bore official seals and signatures, though the legal language was too dense for him to pass in the field. But it was the ledger that made his hands tremble slightly as he flipped through its pages. columns of numbers, dates going back decades, and names, some of which he recognized from newspaper headlines and political coverage. This wasn't just historical curiosity, this was evidence of something significant enough that someone had hidden it away in a remote cabin and someone else had spent considerable effort to find it. Eamon's radio squawked, making him jump. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. What's your status on the Blackwood investigation?" "Still processing the scene," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "Looks like more than simple trespassing. I'm going to need some time to document everything properly." "Copy that. Let us know when you're clear." He carefully rewrapped the items and secured them in the box. Standard procedure would be to log everything as evidence and file a report, but something told him this situation was far from standard. The methodical nature of the search, the precision with which the intruder had located this specific hiding place, and the contents of the box itself all pointed to something much larger than a random break-in. As Eamon prepared to leave the cabin, he noticed fresh tire tracks in the soft earth near the road, tracks that hadn't been there when he'd arrived. Someone had been watching, waiting to see what he would find. The forest suddenly felt a lot less safe than it had an hour ago. The drive back to town gave Eamon time to think, but his thoughts kept circling back to the metallic glint he'd seen in that hole beneath the floorboards. By the time he reached the ranger station, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the parking lot, and his curiosity had transformed into something closer to obsession. He sat in his truck for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, and pulled out his phone. The photos he'd taken of the cabin looked even more ominous on the small screen. The torn floorboards created jagged wounds in the wood, and that dark cavity beneath seemed to swallow the camera's flash. He zoomed in on the last photo, the one where he'd glimpsed something metallic, but the image was too grainy to reveal any details. Inside the station, Deputy Chief Martinez was just finishing up paperwork. She looked up as Eamon entered, her sharp eyes immediately reading his expression. "That trespassing call turn into something interesting?" she asked, setting down her pen. Eamon hesitated. He could file a simple report about the break-in and leave it at that. No one would question it. But something about the deliberate way those floorboards had been pried up, the careful excavation beneath, told him this was more than random vandalism. "Maybe," he said finally. "Someone broke into the old Hartwell cabin up on Ridge Road, tore up the floors like they were looking for something specific." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "The Hartwell place? That's been empty for, what, 15 years?" "About that. But here's the thing. Whoever did this knew exactly where to dig. They pulled up boards in one specific spot and excavated maybe 2 feet down. Found something too, from the looks of it. What kind of something? That's what I'd like to find out. I want to go back up there with proper equipment, do this by the book." Martinez studied him for a long moment. "You thinking this connects to something bigger? I don't know yet. But my gut says this wasn't some kids messing around." She nodded slowly. "Take Wilson with you tomorrow morning. And Eamon? If you find anything that looks like evidence of a serious crime, you call it into county immediately. We're not equipped to handle major investigations." The next morning dawned grey and misty, with fog clinging to the mountains like cobwebs. Eamon met Officer Wilson at the station just after 7. Wilson was young, maybe 25, with an eagerness that reminded Eamon of himself 15 years ago. He'd been transferred to their district only 6 months earlier, and this would be his first real investigation. "So what exactly are we looking for?" Wilson asked as they loaded equipment into Eamon's truck. "Evidence of what someone else was looking for," Eamon replied, securing a metal detector in the truck bed alongside shovels, a camera, and evidence bags. And hopefully, what they found. The drive to the cabin took 40 minutes through winding mountain roads that grew progressively narrower and more isolated. When they finally reached the overgrown driveway, Wilson whistled low. Creepy place. "How long did you say it's been empty?" 15 years, give or take. Old man Hartwell died, and his kids live back east. Property's been in legal limbo ever since." They approached the cabin cautiously, though Eman was reasonably certain their intruder was long gone. Inside, everything looked exactly as he'd left it the day before, except for one detail that made him stop short. "What is it?" Wilson asked, following Eman's gaze to the excavated area. "The hole's been filled in. Where yesterday there had been a cavity 2 feet deep, now there was only loose dirt and debris, hastily packed back into place. Someone had returned after Eman left and attempted to cover their tracks. Whoever did this has been watching," Eman said quietly. "They saw me discover their dig site and came back to clean up." Wilson's hand moved instinctively toward his radio. "Should we call for backup? Let's see what we're dealing with first." Eman knelt beside the filled hole and began carefully removing the loose dirt with his hands. It didn't take long to reach the bottom of the original excavation. His fingers touched something smooth and hard, metal as he'd suspected. Working together, they carefully unearthed a metal ammunition box, military surplus from the looks of it, about the size of a shoebox. It was surprisingly heavy, and when Eman shook it gently, something shifted inside with a soft rustling sound. "Papers," Wilson said. "Has to be documents of some kind." Eman turned the box over in his hands, looking for a way to open it without damaging potential evidence. The latch was corroded but functional. As he prepared to lift the lid, his radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, this is dispatch. We've got a report of suspicious activity at your location. Anonymous caller says they spotted armed individuals heading up Ridge Road." Eman and Wilson exchanged glances. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. "Copy that, dispatch," Eman replied. "Unit 47 and Unit 52 are on scene. We'll investigate." He looked down at the box in his hands, then at Wilson's tense face. "Whatever's in here," he said quietly, "someone's willing to come back for it." The forensics team arrived at dawn, their white van cutting through the morning mist like a ghost. Eman watched from the cabin's porch as they unloaded their equipment, methodical and efficient. He'd barely slept, spending the night replaying every detail of what he'd found beneath those floorboards. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead forensic anthropologist, approached him with a thermos of coffee. "Long night?" "You could say that." Eman accepted the cup gratefully. "I've secured the scene, but I haven't touched anything since I called it in." Chen nodded, pulling on latex gloves. "Walk me through it." They descended into the cabin together, and Eman felt his stomach tighten as they approached the hole in the floor. The morning light streaming through the dirty windows made everything seem more real, more immediate. Chen crouched beside the opening, her expression unreadable as she examined the contents. "How old do you think?" Eman asked. "Hard to say without proper examination, but based on the decomposition and the style of clothing." She paused, using a small brush to clear dirt from what appeared to be a belt buckle. "I'd estimate at least 10 years, possibly 15. Eman's radio crackled to life. "Ranger station to Eman. Go ahead. Sheriff Morrison wants to see you. Says it's urgent." Chen looked up from her work. "Go ahead. We'll be here for hours. I'll call you if we find anything significant." The drive to town felt longer than usual, Eman's mind churning with questions. The Forest Service rarely dealt with anything more serious than poaching or illegal camping. Murder investigations were well outside his wheelhouse, but something about this case felt personal now. The careful burial, the remote location, the way someone had gone to great lengths to hide what happened. It spoke to a level of planning that made his skin crawl. Sheriff Morrison's office smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. The man himself looked like he hadn't slept either, his usually neat uniform wrinkled and his grey hair disheveled. "Eman, good. Close the door." The ranger complied, taking a seat across from Morrison's cluttered desk. "What's going on, Sheriff?" "That's what I was hoping you could tell me." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Eman's face. "I made some calls last night after you reported the body. Asked around about that cabin, its history, and officially it's been abandoned for 20 years, belonged to a hunting club that dissolved when the members got too old to maintain it." Morrison paused, tapping a pen against his desk. "Unofficially, there are rumors it was used for other purposes. Emmon felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of purposes? The kind that involve powerful people who value their privacy. Politicians, businessmen, judges. The kind of people who have the resources to make problems disappear. The implications hit Emmon like a physical blow. You think whoever's buried under that cabin stumbled onto something they shouldn't have? I think we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Morrison's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I got a call this morning from someone who suggested it might be better for everyone if we ruled this an accidental death. Historical remains from some old hunting accident. You're kidding. Do I look like I'm kidding? Morrison's expression was grim. Emmon, I've been sheriff of this county for 15 years. I've seen what happens to people who dig too deep into the wrong holes. And this hole you found? It's got wrong written all over it. Emmon stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the town was waking up, people heading to work, kids walking to school, normal life continuing while something dark lurked beneath the surface. So, what are you saying? We just cover this up? Pretend we never found anything? I'm saying we need to be smart. Follow protocol, but don't go looking for trouble. Morrison joined him at the window. That body's been in the ground for over a decade. Whatever happened to that person, the people responsible have had plenty of time to cover their tracks. Emmon's radio buzzed again. Dr. Chen's voice came through clearly. Emmon, you need to get back here. We found something. Morrison and Emmon exchanged glances. Whatever Chen had discovered, Emmon knew there was no going back now. The investigation had taken on a life of its own. I have to go, Emmon said, heading for the door. Just remember what I said, Morrison called after him. Some secrets have teeth. As Emmon drove back toward the forest, Morrison's warning echoed in his mind. But he also thought about the person buried beneath that cabin floor. Someone who deserved justice, regardless of how dangerous the truth might be. The trees seemed to close in around his vehicle as he approached the cabin, their shadows deeper and more ominous than before. Whatever Dr. Chen had found was about to change everything. The forensics team arrived at dawn, their white van cutting through the morning mist like a ghost. Emmon watched from the cabin's porch as they unloaded their equipment, metal cases catching the pale sunlight filtering through the canopy. He'd spent the night in his truck, unwilling to leave the scene unguarded, surviving on bitter coffee and the growing certainty that he was in over his head. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead forensic anthropologist, emerged from the van with practiced efficiency. Emmon had worked with her before on a hiking accident that turned out to be something darker. She was thorough, methodical, and didn't ask unnecessary questions, qualities he appreciated more with each passing hour. What do we have? Chen asked, pulling on latex gloves as she approached the cabin. Human remains. Partial skeleton. Been there a while. Emmon led her inside, noting how she immediately began cataloguing details with her eyes. Found some personal effects too. A watch, wedding ring, wallet with ID. Chen knelt beside the exposed grave, her movements careful and reverent. The bones look old. Definitely not recent. She photographed the scene from multiple angles before beginning her examination. Based on the position and what I can see of the skull, this appears to be an adult male. The way the body was placed, this wasn't accidental. Emmon's radio crackled to life. Ranger 7, this is dispatch. Sheriff Morrison is requesting your location. Cabin 47, Old Mill Trail. Tell him to follow the forensics van tracks. Morrison arrived 30 minutes later, his patrol car kicking up dust as it pulled alongside the other vehicles. The sheriff was a tall man with silver hair and calculating eyes that missed nothing. He'd been in law enforcement for over 20 years, and Emmon had learned to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor. Today, Morrison looked troubled. Hell of a thing, Morrison said, surveying the scene. Any idea who our John Doe might be? Emmon handed over the evidence bag containing the wallet. Thomas Brennan, according to the driver's license. Address listed as Portland, expired 15 years ago. Morrison's face went carefully blank. Brennan, you said? You know the name? Might be nothing. Morrison studied the license photo through the plastic. There was a journalist named Thomas Brennan who went missing around that time. was working on some investigative piece about environmental violations, illegal logging operations. Case went cold pretty quick. Chen looked up from her work. The skeletal remains are consistent with that time frame. I'll need to do a full examination back at the lab, but preliminary assessment suggests this individual died from blunt force trauma to the skull. The pieces clicked together in Eamon's mind like a puzzle he didn't want to solve. An investigative journalist buried in the middle of state forest land, killed for getting too close to something. Sheriff, who owned this cabin 15 years ago? That's what we need to find out. Morrison's voice carried a weight that made Eamon uneasy. I'll run the property records when I get back to the station. As Chen continued her meticulous documentation, Eamon found himself drawn back to the cabin's interior. Something nagged at him, a detail he couldn't quite place. He examined the walls, the ceiling, the remaining furniture. Then he saw it, a small section of the wall near the back corner where the wood grain didn't quite match. Using his knife, he carefully pried at the boards until one came loose, revealing a hollow space behind the wall. Inside was a waterproof bag containing what looked like documents and photographs. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled it free. Sheriff, you need to see this. Morrison joined him as Eamon opened the bag. Inside were dozens of photographs showing logging operations, trucks loaded with timber, and what appeared to be illegal cutting in protected areas. There were also financial records, correspondence, and maps marking specific locations throughout the forest. One photograph made Morrison curse under his breath. It showed a man in an expensive suit shaking hands with someone whose face was partially obscured. In the background stood a familiar mountain peak that Eamon recognized immediately. It was taken somewhere in their jurisdiction. This is what got Brennan killed, Morrison said quietly. He wasn't just investigating environmental violations, he was documenting a conspiracy. Eamon studied the financial records. The numbers were staggering, millions of dollars changing hands through shell companies and offshore accounts. Who were they paying off? That's the million-dollar question. Morrison sealed the documents in an evidence bag, and whoever was involved 15 years ago might still be around today. Chen's voice cut through their conversation. I've found something else. She was holding what appeared to be a small recording device, still sealed in plastic. It was buried with the body. The three of them stared at the recorder in silence. Whatever secrets Thomas Brennan had died protecting were far from buried. They were very much alive. And now Eamon realized that by uncovering this grave, he might have just painted a target on all their backs. The fluorescent lights of the forensics lab hummed overhead as Eamon watched Dr. Sarah Chen carefully extract soil samples from the evidence bags. 3 days had passed since the discovery at the cabin, and the preliminary results were already painting a disturbing picture. The bones are definitely human, Chen confirmed, adjusting her glasses as she peered at the microscope. Female, approximately 20 to 25 years old at time of death. Based on the degradation patterns, I'd estimate they've been buried for 15 to 20 years. Eamon's jaw tightened. 20 years ago, he'd been fresh out of the academy, stationed 2 counties over. But he remembered the stories that filtered through the law enforcement community. Young women who'd gone missing along this stretch of wilderness, cases that went cold despite intensive searches. Any signs of trauma? Chen nodded grimly. Blunt force trauma to the skull, definitely not accidental. She pulled up digital images on her computer screen. But here's what's really interesting. Look at this. The photographs showed fragments of fabric, preserved by the specific soil conditions beneath the cabin. Even after 2 decades, Eamon could make out patterns, a floral print, delicate and feminine. Designer fabric, Chen continued. High-end silk blend. Not the kind of thing you'd expect to find on a camping trip or casual forest visit. Eamon studied the images more closely. Something nagged at him about the pattern, a half-formed memory trying to surface. Any identifying markers, labels, buttons? That's the strange part. Everything that might identify the manufacturer has been deliberately removed, cut out with surgical precision. Chen switched to another image, showing frayed edges where labels should have been. Someone took great care to eliminate anything traceable. The lab door opened, and Deputy Martinez entered carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a manila folder thick with papers. "Boss, you need to see this. I've been going through missing persons reports from 15 to 20 to 5 years ago." Eamon accepted the folder, noting the weight of it. Too many missing women, too many unsolved cases. Find anything that matches our time frame? 17 women reported missing in a 100-mile radius during that period. But here's the thing. Most of them were from lower-income families, runaways, women without strong support networks, the kind of cases that don't get sustained media attention. Except for one name that jumped out at Eamon as he flipped through the reports. Jessica Whitmore, age 22, missing since June 1998. Unlike the others, her case file was substantial. Dozens of witness interviews, extensive search operations, significant media coverage. "Tell me about Whitmore," Eamon said, holding up the file. Martinez leaned against the lab bench. Daughter of Richard Whitmore, used to own half the timber rights in this region. She disappeared after a graduation party at the family's summer estate, about 30 miles from our cabin site. Massive search effort, FBI involvement, the works. Case went cold after 6 months. Eamon remembered now. The Whitmore name had been everywhere that summer. Richard Whitmore had offered a $50,000 reward, held press conferences weekly, hired private investigators when the official search scaled back. Where's Richard Whitmore now? Died in 2010, heart attack. But his business partner, Thomas Crane, still runs Whitmore Crane Timber. They're one of the biggest landowners in 3 counties. Dr. Chen looked up from her examination table. "If I could interrupt, there's something else. I found traces of lime in the soil samples from around the burial site. Someone tried to accelerate decomposition, but the cabin's foundation created an alkaline environment that actually helped preserve the remains." The 3 of them stood in contemplative silence, each processing the implications. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. It was methodical, planned, executed by someone with knowledge of forensic countermeasures. Eamon's phone buzzed. "Sheriff Barnes." "Eamon, where are you?" "Forensics lab with Chen and Martinez. We've got preliminary results. Drop everything and get back here. Now." Barnes's voice carried an edge Eamon had rarely heard. "We've got a problem." 20 minutes later, Eamon walked into Barnes's office to find him pacing behind his desk, his usually calm demeanor replaced by visible agitation. 2 men in expensive suits sat in the visitor chairs, one middle-aged with graying temples, the other younger with the predatory alertness of a high-priced attorney. "Ranger Eamon," Barnes said, his voice carefully controlled. "Meet Thomas Crane and his attorney David Walsh. Mr. Crane has some concerns about your investigation." Crane stood, extending a manicured hand. "Ranger, I understand you've discovered some remains on property adjacent to Whitmore Crane Holdings. I wanted to offer our full cooperation and resources to help resolve this matter quickly and quietly." The emphasis on quietly wasn't lost on Eamon. He accepted the handshake, noting Crane's grip, firm, confident, but his palm was damp with perspiration. "That's generous of you, Mr. Crane. Any particular reason you're interested in this case?" Crane's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Just good corporate citizenship, Ranger. We can't have unsolved mysteries affecting local property values, can we?" The manila folder felt heavier than it should have as Eamon spread its contents across his kitchen table. 3 cups of coffee had grown cold beside him, and dawn was still hours away. Sleep seemed impossible now, not after what he'd found in Marcus Webb's personnel file. Webb hadn't just been any federal agent. He'd been ATF, specializing in weapons trafficking with a particular focus on military-grade ordnance. His last assignment before retiring had been investigating a network that was selling stolen military weapons to domestic terrorists. The case had been classified, the details blacked out, but the timeline matched perfectly with when Webb had moved to Pine Ridge. Eamon's phone buzzed. Sarah Chen's name appeared on the screen. "You need to see something," she said without preamble. "I'm at the lab. It's 3 in the morning. I know what time it is. Get down here." The forensics lab was eerily quiet, lit only by the harsh fluorescent lights above Sarah's workstation. She looked like she hadn't slept either, her usually pristine lab coat wrinkled and coffee-stained. "The serial numbers on those weapons," she said, pulling up files on her computer screen. "I ran them through every database I could access. They're not just military. They're from a specific shipment that went missing from Fort Garrison 5 years ago." Eman leaned closer to the monitor. "Missing how?" "That's where it gets interesting. Officially, it was reported as a clerical error. The weapons were supposedly transferred to another base, but the paperwork got mixed up. Case closed. But I have a friend at ATF who owed me a favor." She clicked to another screen, this one showing a classified report with most of the text redacted. The weapons were stolen during transport. Inside job. Someone with high-level access orchestrated the whole thing, but they never caught who. The investigation was shut down after the lead agent died in a car accident. Let me guess. Marcus Webb. Bingo. Sarah's expression was grim. But here's the real kicker. I cross-referenced the theft with other incidents around the same time. This wasn't an isolated case, Eman. We're talking about a systematic operation that moved millions of dollars worth of military hardware. Eman felt the pieces clicking together with terrifying clarity. Webb discovered who was behind it. That's why he came here. He wasn't running from the case. He was working it off the books. And someone found out. Sarah pulled up another file. "I also ran the prints from that journal. Besides Webb's, there's one other set. They're in the system, but they're flagged with a federal security classification I can't crack." The implications hit Eman like a physical blow. Whoever had killed Webb wasn't just covering up a crime. They were protecting an ongoing operation. And now that same person knew someone else had found the cash. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his supervisor's number. "Ray? What are you doing up at—" "Where the hell are you, Eman?" Captain Ray Morrison's voice was tight with anger. "I just got a call from the FBI. They're taking over your case." "What?" "They can't just—" "They can, and they are. Agent Holloway from the Denver field office will be here at 8 sharp. You're to turn over all evidence and cease any further investigation immediately." Eman met Sarah's eyes across the lab. She was already quietly saving files to a thumb drive. "Ray, there's more to this than—" "I don't want to hear it. This comes from way above my pay grade, Eman. Stand down. That's an order." The line went dead. In the silence that followed, Eman could hear his own heartbeat. "How did they know?" Sarah whispered. "We haven't filed any reports yet." The answer chilled him. Someone had been watching, waiting. The moment he'd started digging into Webb's background, he'd triggered an alarm somewhere in the federal system. "You need to disappear," he told Sarah. "Take everything you've found and get out of here. Don't go home tonight." "What about you?" "I'm going back to that cabin. If Webb hid weapons there, maybe he hid something else. Something they missed." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Eman, if you're right about this, then whoever killed Webb has resources we can't imagine. Federal contacts, surveillance capabilities, all the more reason to move fast." He pocketed the thumb drive she handed him. "Send copies of everything to someone you trust outside the state, someone with no connection to law enforcement." As he headed for the door, Sarah called after him. "What if this Agent Holloway is legitimate? What if you're wrong?" Eman paused, thinking about Marcus Webb's journal, the careful documentation of someone who knew he was living on borrowed time. "Then I'll apologize later," he said. "But if I'm right, we might be the only ones left who can stop this." The pre-dawn darkness felt different as he drove back toward Pine Ridge. Every pair of headlights in his rearview mirror looked suspicious. Every shadow held potential threat. Webb had lived with this paranoia for months, knowing that the very people sworn to protect and serve might be the ones hunting him. Now Eman understood exactly how that felt. The warehouse district sprawled before them like a graveyard of rusted dreams, its skeletal structures casting long shadows in the dying light. Eman killed the engine 2 blocks away, the sudden silence amplifying the weight of what they were walking into. Sarah's breathing had grown shallow beside him, her knuckles white against the manila envelope containing copies of everything they'd found. "You sure about this?" he asked, checking his service weapon one final time. "Martinez is the only person I trust completely at the paper. If anyone can get this story out safely, it's him." Sarah's voice carried more conviction than her trembling hands suggested. "Besides, we can't keep running forever." They moved through the shadows between buildings, their footsteps muffled by years of accumulated debris. The meeting point was an old loading dock behind a defunct textile factory, chosen specifically because it offered multiple escape routes. Eman's ranger training kicked in automatically, cataloging sight lines and potential threats as they approached. Martinez was already waiting, a compact man in his 50s whose weathered face spoke of decades chasing dangerous stories. He emerged from behind a concrete pillar as they drew near, his editor's instincts immediately picking up on their tension. "Jesus, Sarah, you look like you've seen a ghost." His eyes shifted to Eman, taking in the uniform, the alert posture. "And you must be the ranger who's got everyone so worked up." "Everyone." Eman's hand instinctively moved toward his weapon. "What do you mean?" Martinez's expression darkened. "There's been chatter. People asking questions about a Forest Service investigation, specifically about you, Ranger Castellanos, the kind of people who don't usually care about Park Service business." Sarah stepped forward, pressing the envelope into Martinez's hands. "Luis, this is bigger than we thought. Senator Blackwood, the pharmaceutical companies, the missing hikers, it's all connected. And there are more bodies." The editor's eyes widened as he quickly scanned the documents. "Mother of God, you're talking about systematic murder spanning decades. Do you have any idea what this means?" A sound echoed from the far end of the warehouse complex, the distant slam of a car door. All three of them froze, straining to listen. Another door, then another, too many for coincidence. "We need to go," Eman whispered urgently. "Now." But it was already too late. The beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping systematically across the loading dock. Then another appeared from the opposite direction. They were being boxed in. "This way," Martinez hissed, leading them toward a gap in the chain-link fence behind the dock. But as they reached it, another light appeared, blocking their escape route. Eman drew his weapon, his mind racing through tactical options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in an industrial maze with limited cover. The smart play would be surrender, except he knew these weren't people interested in taking prisoners. "Federal agents," a voice called out, though something about the tone made Eman's skin crawl. Too smooth, too rehearsed. "We need to talk." Like hell, Sarah breathed beside him. The lights were closing in now, at least 6 beams converging on their position. Eman counted muzzle flashes in his head, standard tactical formation, professional execution. These weren't random thugs, they were trained operatives. "You've stumbled into something beyond your jurisdiction, Ranger," the same voice continued. "Hand over the documents, and we can discuss this civilly." Martinez clutched the envelope tighter. "There are copies," he called back. "Kill us, and this goes public anyway." A harsh laugh echoed off the concrete walls. "Mr. Martinez, you're assuming we haven't already dealt with your newspaper's servers. Technology is a wonderful thing." Eman felt his blood run cold. They'd anticipated everything, planned for every contingency. The documents in Martinez's hands might be the last evidence of their discovery. "The cabin," Sarah whispered suddenly. "Tell me you made backups." 3 copies, Martinez breathed back. "Different locations." "Not anymore," the voice said, close enough now that they could make out multiple figures moving between the concrete pillars. "Your safety deposit box at First National, your home office safe, your sister's house in Sacramento. We've been thorough." The revelation hit them like a physical blow. They'd been watching, waiting, allowing them to gather evidence only to systematically eliminate every trace of it. The entire investigation had been orchestrated from the beginning. "So what now?" Eman called out, buying time while his eyes searched for any possible escape route. "You just clean up the loose ends?" "The ranger asks good questions," came the reply. "Unfortunately, some questions are better left unanswered." The light stopped moving, forming a perfect perimeter around their position. In the sudden stillness, Eman could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of decades of corruption and murder pressing down on them. Whatever happened next, he knew the forest cabin had been just the beginning of something that reached far deeper into the darkness than any of them had imagined. The envelope crinkled in Martinez's grip as the first footsteps began moving closer. The abandoned mining office sat like a tumor against the mountainside, its corrugated metal siding streaked with rust and decay. Eman killed the engine 50 yards down the access road, choosing to approach on foot through the dense pine cover. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in fractured beams, casting everything in a patchwork of light and shadow that made his eyes work overtime. Sarah had insisted on coming despite his protests, and now she crouched beside him behind a fallen log, her camera ready. The building showed no signs of recent activity, no vehicles, no movement in the dark windows, but Eman's instincts prickled with unease. The coordinates from Hendrik's phone had led them here, and that alone made this place dangerous. "Looks empty," Sarah whispered. Eman studied the structure through his binoculars. The front door hung askew on rusted hinges, and weeds had grown up through cracks in the concrete foundation. But something was off. The windows were too clean for a building that had supposedly been abandoned for decades. "Maybe," he said, "but we're not taking any chances." They waited another 10 minutes, watching for any sign of movement. When Eman was satisfied they were alone, he led Sarah in a wide arc toward the back of the building. His service weapon remained holstered but ready, and every shadow seemed to hold potential threats. The rear door was secured with a heavy padlock that looked far newer than the building itself. Eman examined it closely. No rust, the metal still bright. Someone had definitely been maintaining this place. "Can you get us in?" Sarah asked. Eman pulled out his multi-tool and studied the lock mechanism. It was a good lock, but not impossible. After 5 minutes of careful work, the shackle clicked open. He eased the door inward, wincing at the soft squeal of hinges that echoed in the stillness. The interior reeked of musty air and motor oil. Eman's flashlight beam revealed a space that had clearly served multiple purposes over the years. Ancient mining equipment sat covered in tarps along one wall, while newer additions, metal shelving, a desk, filing cabinets, occupied the center of the room. Sarah's camera flash illuminated corners his flashlight had missed. "This isn't abandoned," she said. "Someone's been using this place recently." The desk drawers were locked, but the multi-tool made quick work of them too. Inside, Eman found shipping manifests, invoices, and correspondence that made his blood run cold. Hartley Industries appeared on document after document, along with names he recognized from the files they'd copied from Hendrix's office. "Look at this," Sarah said from across the room. She'd found a wall map marked with red pins and dates. These locations, some of them matched the coordinates we found in those files. Eman joined her at the map. Each pin was labeled with a date and a number. The pattern wasn't immediately obvious, but something about it nagged at him. "Take pictures of everything. We need to—" The sound of vehicles approaching cut him off. Multiple engines, moving fast up the access road. Eman killed his flashlight and motioned Sarah toward the back door. "We need to go. Now." They slipped out the rear exit just as the first vehicle came into view through the front windows. Sarah's equipment bag caught on the door frame, and Eman had to yank it free as voices echoed from the front of the building. They ran for the tree line, branches whipping at their faces as they crashed through the undergrowth. Behind them, doors slammed and men shouted orders. Eman recognized one of the voices, Marcus Webb, Hartley's head of security. "This way," Eman gasped, pulling Sarah deeper into the forest. They needed distance and concealment, and the thick pine cover would provide both if they could reach the ridgeline. A gunshot cracked through the air, and bark exploded from a tree inches from Sarah's head. They weren't just being pursued, they were being hunted. "Stay low," Eman hissed, drawing his weapon. "Keep moving toward the ridge." More shots rang out, the reports echoing off the mountainsides. Their pursuers were spreading out, trying to flank them. Professional tactics. These weren't just security guards, they were trained operatives. Eman's radio crackled to life. "All units be advised, we have reports of shots fired in the Clearwater Mountain area." Ranger Eman respond. He couldn't risk answering. Any transmission could be intercepted, and their position was precarious enough without advertising their location to anyone monitoring radio traffic. They reached a small clearing where ancient mining equipment lay scattered like the bones of some long-dead beast. Eman pulled Sarah behind a rusted ore cart and tried to get his bearings. The ridge was still a quarter-mile ahead, but the terrain was getting steeper and the cover thinner. "How many are there?" Sarah whispered. Eman listened to the sounds of pursuit filtering through the trees, multiple voices, coordinated movement patterns. "Too many," he said grimly, "and they know these mountains better than I thought they would." The net was closing around them, and Eman realized with cold certainty that they stumbled into something far more organized and dangerous than a simple cover-up. This was a full-scale operation, and they were now targets in what felt increasingly like a war. The headlights of Eman's truck cut through the darkness as he navigated the winding forest road, Sarah's revelation echoing in his mind. The Blackwater Group, a name that carried weight in political circles, known for their strategic consulting and deep pockets. If they were involved in whatever had been buried beneath that cabin, the stakes had just escalated beyond anything he'd imagined. His radio crackled to life. "Ranger Eman, this is dispatch. We've got reports of suspicious activity near the old mining road, about 2 miles from your current location." Eman grabbed the handset. "What kind of activity?" "Multiple vehicles, possible surveillance equipment. Anonymous tip came in 20 minutes ago." The timing wasn't coincidental. Someone was watching, waiting. Eman killed his headlights and pulled onto a narrow service road, cutting the engine. The forest fell silent around him, except for the tick of cooling metal and distant wind through the pines. He checked his weapon and slipped into the darkness, moving carefully through the underbrush. The old mining road ran parallel to his position, and within minutes he could see the glow of tactical lights filtering through the trees. 3 black SUVs were parked in formation, their occupants moving with military precision. Through his binoculars, Eman watched as figures in dark clothing assembled what looked like communications equipment. These weren't casual observers, this was a professional operation. One man directed the others with hand signals, his face illuminated briefly by a tablet screen. Even in the dim light, Eman recognized the sharp features and graying temples. Marcus Webb, Blackwater Group's head of security. A branch snapped behind him. Eman spun around as a flashlight beam struck his eyes, momentarily blinding him. "Don't move," a voice commanded. "Hands where I can see them." Eman raised his hands slowly, his vision clearing to reveal a woman pointing a pistol at his chest. She was tall, athletic, with the controlled posture of someone accustomed to violence. "Ranger badge doesn't mean much out here at night," she said, stepping closer, "especially when you're spying on private citizens." "This is federal land," Eman replied evenly. "I have every right to investigate suspicious activity." The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Suspicious? We're conducting a geological survey, perfectly legal, all the proper permits filed." "At midnight? The equipment works better without solar interference." She gestured with the gun toward the road. "Walk." As they emerged from the tree line, Marcus Webb looked up from his tablet with mild annoyance, as if Eman's presence was an inconvenience rather than a threat. "Ranger Eman," Webb said, his tone conversational. "We meet at last. I've heard quite a lot about you in the past few days. Nothing good, I'm sure." Webb chuckled. "Actually, mostly positive. Dedicated, thorough, honest to a fault." Those are admirable qualities in law enforcement, but inconvenient for whatever you're doing here. We're trying to prevent a tragedy, Webb said, setting down the tablet. That evidence you found, those documents, they're part of a larger picture you couldn't possibly understand. There are national security implications at stake. Emmons studied the man's face, looking for tells. Funny how national security always gets invoked when powerful people get caught. This isn't about politics or money, Webb continued. 30 years ago, certain decisions were made to protect American interests abroad. Unpleasant decisions, perhaps, but necessary ones. The documentation you've stumbled upon could compromise ongoing operations, endanger lives. Whose lives? The people who were murdered to keep this secret. Webb's expression hardened slightly. Collateral damage is unfortunate, but sometimes unavoidable. We're offering you a chance to walk away from this. Transfer to another district, maybe take that promotion you've been passed over for twice. The offer hung in the air between them. Emmons could feel the weight of the woman's gun behind him, the watchful eyes of the other operatives in the shadows. These people had resources, connections, the ability to make problems disappear permanently. And if I refuse, then you become part of the problem, Webb said simply. And problems need solutions. Emmons' mind raced through his options. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and alone in the wilderness with people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. But Sarah was still out there with copies of the evidence, and somewhere in those documents might be the key to bringing justice for victims who'd been silenced too long. I need time to think about it, he said finally. Webb checked his watch. You have until dawn. After that, the offer expires and we move to more permanent solutions. He nodded to the woman. Miss Chen will escort you back to your vehicle. As they walked through the forest, Chen leaning close enough that Emmons could feel the gun barrel against his ribs, he counted steps and memorized landmarks. Dawn was still 5 hours away, but he wouldn't be waiting until morning to give Webb his answer. The game had changed, and Emmons was done playing defense. The abandoned gas station sat like a tomb beside the cracked asphalt of Route 47, its windows boarded up and weeds pushing through the concrete where pumps once stood. Emmons parked behind the building, using the rusted shell of a delivery truck for cover. He'd been watching for 20 minutes, and his patience was wearing thin. Sarah had insisted on coming despite his protests. She crouched beside him now, her camera ready, eyes scanning the tree line beyond the station. You sure Martinez said to meet here? He was specific. Emmons checked his watch again. Martinez was now 45 minutes late, and every instinct told him something was wrong. The detective had sounded spooked on the phone, claiming he'd found something about the cabin's history that changed everything. A crow cawed somewhere in the darkness, and Sarah jumped. This place gives me the creeps. Emmons was about to suggest they leave when headlights swept across the gas station's facade. A sedan pulled into the lot, moving slowly. But instead of Martinez's unmarked police car, this was a black luxury vehicle with tinted windows. That's not him, Sarah whispered. Two men emerged from the sedan. Even in the dim light, Emmons could see they weren't local law enforcement. They moved with military precision, scanning their surroundings before approaching the station's entrance. One spoke into a radio, his voice too low to make out words. Emmons' phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, station compromised. Meet at Old Mill, come alone. M. He showed Sarah the message. Her face went pale. How did they know Martinez was meeting us here? Good question. Emmons' mind raced through the possibilities, none of them comforting. Either Martinez's phone was compromised or someone in the sheriff's department was feeding information to the wrong people. The thought made his stomach clench. They retreated to Emmons' truck, keeping low until they were safely behind the delivery truck's bulk. The two men had entered the gas station through a side door that looked like it had been recently forced open. Whoever they were, they'd come prepared. The drive to the Old Mill took them deeper into the forest, along roads that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Emmons killed the headlights as they approached, relying on moonlight to navigate the final quarter mile. The mill had been abandoned since the 1980s, its massive wheel frozen in place, covered in moss and decay. Martinez's car was there, parked behind the mill's main building, but something felt wrong. The windows were down despite the evening chill, and there was no sign of movement inside. "Stay in the truck," Eamon told Sarah. "Like hell. This isn't a discussion. If something's happened to Martinez, then you'll need backup." She was already opening her door. "I didn't come this far to sit in a parking lot." They approached the car together, and Eamon's worst fears were confirmed. Martinez slumped over the steering wheel, blood pooling on the seat beneath him. A single bullet hole marked his temple. The detective's eyes stared sightlessly at the dashboard, his face frozen in an expression of surprise. Sarah gasped and turned away, but Eamon forced himself to look closer. Martinez's service weapon was still holstered. Whatever had happened, he hadn't had time to defend himself. This was an execution, clean and professional. "We need to call this in," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "To who?" Eamon's question hung in the air between them. If Martinez's contact with them had been monitored, if someone in the sheriff's department was involved, then calling for backup might be signing their own death warrants. A piece of paper protruded from Martinez's jacket pocket. Eamon carefully extracted it, finding a photocopy of what looked like a land survey from 1987. The cabin's location was marked, but so were several other properties in the area. All of them were connected by red lines to a central point labeled Blackwater Holdings. Sarah leaned over his shoulder. "That's the same company from the Shell Corporation records. Look at this." Eamon pointed to a notation in the margin. In Martinez's handwriting, Senator Carver, board member 1985 to 1990, the pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed was uglier than Eamon had imagined. A sitting U.S. senator with ties to whatever had been buried beneath that cabin. No wonder people were willing to kill to keep it secret. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the mill. Eamon grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the tree line. They made it 10 feet before a spotlight blazed to life, pinning them like insects under glass. "That's far enough, Ranger Collins." The voice was calm, professional. "We need to talk." 3 figures emerged from the shadows, all armed, all moving with the same military precision he'd seen at the gas station. The man in the center lowered a high-powered rifle but kept it ready. "You've been asking the wrong questions," the man continued, "and talking to the wrong people." Detective Martinez learned that lesson the hard way. The disposable phone buzzed against Eamon's palm as he crouched behind the massive Douglas fir, its bark rough against his shoulder. Sarah pressed closer, her breathing shallow in the pre-dawn darkness. The message was brief, package delivered. Clean house protocol initiated. "They're coming," he whispered, showing her the screen before powering down the device. "Marcus got the evidence to the FBI, but Blackstone's people are moving to eliminate loose ends." Sarah's face was pale in the filtered moonlight. "How long do we have?" Before he could answer, the distant rumble of engines echoed through the forest. Multiple vehicles approaching fast along the logging road they'd used just hours earlier. Eamon counted at least 3 distinct engine notes, maybe more. His ranger training kicked in as he calculated distances, cover points, and escape routes through terrain he knew better than anyone. "This way." He led her deeper into the old growth, moving with practiced silence across the forest floor. Behind them, vehicle doors slammed and harsh voices cut through the night air. Flashlight beams swept between the trees, creating dancing shadows that could hide or reveal them depending on timing. They moved parallel to Widow's Creek, using the sound of running water to mask their footsteps. Eamon's mind raced through everything they'd uncovered: the chemical dumping that had poisoned the watershed, the cover-up that reached into the highest levels of county government, the people who died to protect Blackstone Industries' secret. "There," Sarah breathed, pointing ahead. 2 figures emerged from the tree line 50 yards downstream, moving with military precision. They wore night vision goggles and carried assault rifles. This wasn't a corporate cleanup crew, these were professionals. Eamon guided Sarah away from the creek, up the steep slope toward Devil's Ridge. The terrain was treacherous in daylight, potentially deadly in darkness, but it was their best chance. The searchers below would expect them to follow easy paths, not attempt a vertical climb through loose shale and exposed roots. They climbed in silence, pausing every few minutes to listen. The voices grew fainter, but never disappeared entirely. Eamon's radio crackled softly. He'd kept it on emergency frequency, hoping backup might still reach them despite the corruption in the department. All units, this is dispatch. Be advised, federal agents are en route to your location. ETA 15 minutes. Sarah gripped his arm. Is that real? Could be Marcus. Could be them using our own communications against us. Eamon clicked the radio once in acknowledgement, but didn't respond verbally. If it was genuine backup, they'd understand the signal. If it was a trap, he hadn't given away their position. The ridge offered temporary sanctuary but limited options. To the north lay a sheer cliff face. South would take them back toward the search teams. East meant descending into Blackstone's industrial area where more security waited. Only west remained, toward the old fire tower that hadn't been used in decades. The tower, he told Sarah. Radio equipment might still work up there. They picked their way across the ridge, using shadows and rock formations for cover. Behind them, flashlight beams swept the slope they'd just climbed. The professionals were methodical, checking every hiding spot, but the vertical terrain slowed them down. The fire tower loomed against the stars, its steel framework skeletal and forbidding. Eamon tested the first rung of the ladder, rusty but solid. They climbed 40 feet to the observation cabin, their movement causing the entire structure to sway slightly in the wind. Inside the cabin, decades-old equipment covered in dust and cobwebs filled the small space. But Eamon found what he was looking for, an emergency radio system with backup power, maintained by the Forest Service for situations exactly like this. He powered up the system and tuned to federal emergency frequencies. This is Park Ranger Eamon Walsh, requesting immediate assistance. Multiple armed assailants pursuing federal witnesses. Location Devil's Ridge Fire Tower, coordinates Ranger Walsh. This is FBI Special Agent Chen. We're 3 miles out and closing fast. Can you maintain your position? Sarah sagged against the wall in relief, but Eamon remained tense. Through the cabin windows he could see lights moving below. The search teams had reached the base of the tower. Negative on holding position. Hostiles are at our location. He grabbed Sarah's hand. We're moving to secondary position. They climbed higher, onto the tower's observation deck. 60 feet above ground they could see for miles, including the helicopter approaching from the east, running without lights. Is that them, or us? Sarah asked. Eamon watched the aircraft's approach pattern, noting how it swept wide to avoid the search teams below. FBI. They're positioning for extraction. Gunfire erupted from below as the ground team spotted the helicopter. Muzzle flashes lit up the forest as automatic weapons fire shattered the night silence. The helicopter banked sharply, its downdraft causing the tower to vibrate. A rope dropped from the aircraft's open door, and a voice boomed through a speaker. Federal agents, prepare for extraction. The burner phone buzzed against Eamon's chest at 3:47 a.m., jolting him from restless sleep. Sarah's voice crackled through the static, urgent and breathless. They found Marcus, she whispered. He's alive, but barely. They're moving him to County General under protective custody. Eamon sat up, instantly alert. What happened? Beaten half to death and left in a drainage ditch outside Millfield. Someone wanted him to suffer before they killed him, but a jogger found him first. Sarah's voice carried the weight of exhaustion. Eamon, he was clutching something in his hand, a USB drive. The implications hit him like cold water. Marcus had managed to download something before disappearing, something worth dying for. Can you get to him? Already here. Hospital's crawling with federal agents, but I know a nurse who owes me a favor. ICU, room 314. You need to hurry. Eamon dressed quickly, his mind racing through the connections. Vincent Industries, the military contracts, the bodies buried beneath that cabin. Marcus had stumbled onto something that reached far beyond their small town. The cleanup crew at the cabin site had been thorough, but they'd underestimated a scared accountant's desperation. The drive to County General took 20 minutes through empty streets. Dawn was still hours away, and the hospital parking lot sat shrouded in pre-dawn darkness. Eamon counted 3 unmarked sedans near the main entrance, federal surveillance that made his skin crawl. These weren't local agents, someone had called in the big guns. He circled to the service entrance, where Sarah had said she'd leave a maintenance door propped open. The hospital's maze of corridors felt familiar from too many late-night emergency calls, but tonight every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. Sarah intercepted him near the elevator bank, her FBI credentials hanging prominently from her neck. He's sedated but conscious. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, severe head trauma. Whoever did this wanted information first. Did they get it? That's what we need to find out. Sarah's expression was grim. The USB drive is encrypted, but our tech guys think they can crack it. Problem is, we don't know how long we have before someone decides Marcus is too much of a liability to keep breathing. They rode the elevator in tense silence. The ICU buzzed with controlled activity, nurses moving efficiently between rooms, while federal agents tried to look inconspicuous in the waiting area. Sarah flashed her badge at the security detail outside room 314, and they slipped inside. Marcus Volkov looked smaller than Eamon remembered, dwarfed by machines and tubes that kept him alive. His face was a swollen mass of bruises, but his eyes tracked their movement with sharp intelligence. "Ranger Carson," Marcus whispered through damaged lips. "I was hoping you'd come." Eamon moved closer to the bed. "Who did this to you?" "Vincent's cleanup crew. 3 men in a black SUV. They grabbed me outside my apartment." Marcus struggled to sit up, wincing with pain. "But I got what we need first. 20 years of financial records, contract details, payment authorizations, everything." Sarah leaned forward. "The USB drive. What's on it?" "Proof that Vincent Industries has been running black site operations for the Pentagon, off-the-books interrogations, weapons testing, human experimentation." Marcus's voice grew stronger despite his injuries. The cabin was just one site. There are dozens scattered across federal land, all funded through shadow contracts. Eamon felt the pieces clicking into place. The bodies we found, test subjects, prisoners who officially didn't exist, transferred from military detention facilities overseas. Vincent's people would run experiments, then dispose of the evidence. Marcus coughed, specks of blood staining his hospital gown. The ranger who discovered that first site 20 years ago didn't die in an accident. They killed him and buried the investigation. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of medical monitors. Eamon thought about the photographs he'd seen in Daniel's office, the proud history of the ranger service, and realized how deep the corruption ran. "How many people know about this?" Sarah asked. "More than Vincent thinks. I wasn't the only one getting suspicious about the financial irregularities. There are others. Contractors, military personnel, government oversight officials. We've been building a case quietly for months." A commotion in the hallway made them all freeze. Raised voices, the sound of rapid footsteps. Sarah moved to the window, peering through the blinds. "Black SUVs in the parking lot," she reported. 6 men heading for the main entrance. Marcus gripped Eamon's arm with surprising strength. "There's something else on that drive. A list of everyone Vincent considers a threat. Your name is on it, Ranger. So is Agent Walsh's." The hospital's fire alarm began shrieking, and emergency lights bathed the corridor in strobing red. Through the chaos, Eamon heard something that made his blood run cold, the distinctive crack of suppressed gunfire echoing from the floors below. The cleanup crew had arrived, and this time they weren't taking any chances. The safe house felt like a tomb. Eamon stared at the evidence spread across the kitchen table, photographs, documents, and the damning hard drive that contained enough information to topple a criminal empire. 3 days had passed since their narrow escape from the cabin, and the weight of what they'd uncovered pressed down on him like a physical force. Sarah sat across from him, her laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. The journalist had been working almost non-stop, cross-referencing the financial records with public documents and news reports. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her determination burned brighter than ever. "I've got it," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. "The connection we've been looking for." Eman looked up from the photograph he'd been studying, Marcus Chen shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit, outside what appeared to be a government building. "What did you find?" "Senator Patricia Morrison." Sarah turned her laptop toward him. "She's been pushing legislation to open protected forest lands to private development. Look at this, 3 separate bills in the past 2 years, all designed to reduce environmental oversight and streamline the approval process for large-scale projects." Eman leaned forward, studying the screen. Morrison's name had appeared several times in the financial documents, but seeing her legislative record laid out this way painted a chilling picture. She's not just taking bribes, she's actively clearing the path for them. It gets worse. Sarah clicked to another window. "Remember that environmental impact study that mysteriously went missing from the forestry department? The one that would have blocked the development project? Morrison's office requested access to it 2 weeks before it disappeared." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just corporate corruption. It was a systematic dismantling of environmental protections orchestrated at the highest levels of government. The buried evidence they'd found represented years of planning, bribery, and murder, all designed to transform pristine wilderness into profit margins. Eman's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number made his blood run cold. "We have Captain Rodriguez, cabin at Miller's Creek. Come alone or she dies." Sarah saw his expression change. "What is it?" He showed her the message. Her face went pale. "It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap." Eman was already moving, checking his service weapon and grabbing his jacket. "But I can't leave Maria to die. You can't go alone. That's exactly what they want. If I bring backup and they see it, Maria's dead." He paused at the door, meeting Sarah's eyes. "You need to get this story out. Whatever happens to me, make sure the truth sees daylight." "Eman, wait." But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that felt like a death knell. The drive to Miller's Creek took 45 minutes through winding mountain roads. Eman's mind raced as he navigated the familiar territory. He knew this area well, had patrolled these woods for years. If this was where they'd chosen to make their stand, they'd picked carefully. Remote, defensible, with multiple escape routes. The cabin sat in a small clearing, smoke rising from its chimney, a picture of rustic tranquility that made Eman's skin crawl. He parked at the tree line and approached on foot, his weapon drawn but held low. Every shadow could hide a sniper, every sound might be his last warning. Marcus Chen stepped out onto the cabin's porch as Eman emerged from the trees. The developer looked older than in his photographs, his face marked by stress and sleepless nights. 2 armed men flanked him, their tactical gear suggesting military training. "Ranger Eman," Chen called out. "So good of you to join us. Your captain sends her regards. Let me see her." Chen nodded to one of his men, who disappeared inside. Moments later, Captain Rodriguez was dragged onto the porch. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back, and dried blood crusted one side of her face, but her eyes blazed with defiant fury. "Don't give them anything, Eman," she shouted. "They're going to kill us anyway." One of the gunmen struck her across the face, and rage flared white-hot in Eman's chest. His finger tightened on the trigger, but Chen raised a calming hand. Now. Violence is so unnecessary when we can resolve this like civilized people." He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "You have something that belongs to me. I have something you want. A simple trade. The evidence isn't here. But you know where it is. And you're going to tell me." Chen's smile widened. "Or we're going to start sending pieces of your captain back to the ranger station." The sound of vehicles approaching echoed through the forest. multiple engines growing closer. Chen's expression shifted from confidence to alarm as armed figures began emerging from the tree line, not more of his men, but federal agents in tactical gear. Sarah stepped into view beside one of the agents, her camera filming everything. "Surprise," Eamon said, his weapon now trained on Chen's chest. "Turns out, I'm not as stupid as you thought." The warehouse district felt like a graveyard at 3 in the morning. Eamon crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the black SUVs positioned around the perimeter of Building 47. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, FBI en route. "ETA 20 minutes. Do not engage alone." 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. Through his binoculars, he could see movement inside the building, shadows passing by grimy windows, the occasional flash of a flashlight beam. Marcus Chen was in there, and if Blackwood's people had discovered the location, Chen was living on borrowed time. The documents they'd found in the cabin painted a picture that made Eamon's blood run cold. Blackwood Industries hadn't just been dumping chemicals, they'd been conducting illegal medical trials on migrant workers, using the remote forest location as a testing ground. The shallow graves Marcus had photographed weren't random victims. They were test subjects who died from experimental compounds designed for military applications. Senator Catherine Voss's name appeared throughout the correspondence, approving funding and ensuring regulatory oversight stayed buried. Her environmental committee wasn't protecting anything. It was providing cover for human experimentation that would make international headlines and destroy careers across Washington. A figure emerged from the building's side entrance, speaking urgently into a radio. Eamon recognized the man from Blackwood's security team, the same one who'd nearly caught them at the senator's office. The man gestured toward the forest road, and 2 of the SUVs started their engines. They were preparing to leave, with or without Marcus. Eamon made his decision. He'd spent 20 years in law enforcement, and every instinct told him that waiting for backup meant finding another body. Moving in a wide arc, he approached the building from the east side, where a fire escape hung like a broken promise against the brick wall. The metal ladder groaned under his weight, each step echoing despite his efforts at stealth. Through a cracked window on the 2nd floor, he caught sight of the main floor below. 3 men stood around a figure tied to a chair, Marcus Chen, his face bloodied but his eyes still defiant. "The last time I'm asking nicely," one of the men was saying. "Where are the original photographs? The ones you took before you broke into the cabin?" Marcus spat blood onto the concrete floor. "I told you, they're already uploaded to a secure server. Kill me, and they go public automatically." Eamon recognized the bluff. It's what he would have said. But Marcus's captors weren't buying it either. The leader, a man with silver hair and expensive clothes who could only be Blackwood himself, nodded to his associate. "Mr. Chen, we've had 24 hours to trace your digital footprints. There is no dead man's switch. There are no uploaded files. You were clever enough to find our little secret, but not clever enough to properly insurance yourself." The warehouse's main floor was accessible through a service door at the bottom of the fire escape. Eamon tested the handle, locked, but the frame was old and warped. A firm shoulder against the right spot, and it gave way with a crack that seemed to echo like a gunshot. He froze, counting heartbeats, but the voices continued their interrogation. Moving through what had once been an office area, Eamon positioned himself behind a stack of pallets that gave him a clear view of the main floor and multiple exit routes. 3 armed men, plus Blackwood. Marcus in the center, 20 feet away, no clean shot that wouldn't risk hitting the photographer. Eamon's radio crackled softly, Sarah's voice barely audible, 2 minutes out. "Hold position." But Blackwood was checking his watch, impatience written across his features. "We're done here. Clean this up and meet us at the senator's house. She wants confirmation before her morning committee hearing." The man nearest to Marcus raised his pistol. Eamon broke cover, his service weapon drawn. "Federal agent, drop your weapons." The warehouse exploded into chaos. Marcus threw himself sideways, chair and all, as gunfire erupted. Eamon dove behind a concrete pillar as bullets sparked off metal and shattered what remained of the windows. Blackwood was shouting orders, his voice cutting through the gunfire. "Contain this! We cannot afford exposure!" A muzzle flashed to Eamon's left. He returned fire, hearing a grunt of pain as one of the shooters went down. But there were still too many of them, and they were spreading out, trying to flank his position. His radio crackled with Sarah's voice. "Moving in. South entrance." The cavalry was coming, but Marcus was exposed in the middle of the floor, still tied to the overturned chair. Blackwood himself was retreating toward a rear exit, abandoning his men to clean up the mess. Eamon made another desperate choice. Breaking from cover, he sprinted toward Marcus, laying down suppressing fire as bullets whined past his head. He had to reach the photographer before Blackwood escaped with his secrets, before 20 years of murder and corruption disappeared into the night once again. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town looked like every other decaying industrial building that dotted the landscape, but Eamon knew better than to trust appearances. His radio crackled as Sarah's voice came through, confirming the backup units were in position around the perimeter. 3 days of following digital breadcrumbs and connecting dots had led them here, to what they hoped would be the final confrontation with whoever had been pulling the strings. Eamon adjusted his vest and checked his weapon one last time. The evidence from the cabin had been devastating. Financial records, photographs, correspondence that painted a picture of corruption reaching deep into the state government. Governor Hartwell's name appeared repeatedly, along with signatures authorizing payments that coincided perfectly with environmental permits being fast-tracked through the system. Movement on the south side, Sarah's voice whispered through the radio. 2 vehicles just pulled up, black SUVs. Eamon's pulse quickened. Through his binoculars, he watched as 4 figures emerged from the vehicles and approached the warehouse entrance. Even from this distance, he recognized one of them, Marcus Webb, the supposed private investigator who had been asking questions around town, the man who had clearly been feeding information back to his real employers. "Copy that. Hold positions until my signal." Eamon began moving closer, using the scattered debris and rusted equipment as cover. The plan was simple: let them enter the building, then close off all exits before moving in. They needed these people alive and talking. The warehouse door creaked open, and the 4 figures disappeared inside. Eamon waited 30 seconds before keying his radio. "Green light. Move in." He approached the main entrance, while Sarah and her team took the rear exits. Through a grimy window, he could see flashlight beams moving inside, illuminating the cavernous space. Voices carried through the thin walls, urgent and angry. "Told you this was handled. Ranger's been asking too many questions. Need to find those files before." Eamon pushed through the door, his weapon drawn. "State police! Nobody move!" The scene froze like a photograph. Webb stood near the center of the space, holding a metal briefcase. 2 men in expensive suits flanked him, and the 4th figure, a woman Eamon didn't recognize, was kneeling beside what appeared to be a portable document shredder. "Hands where I can see them." Sarah's voice echoed from behind as she entered through the rear door. "Drop everything." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Webb smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Ranger Crenshaw, you really should have stayed in your forest." "Funny thing about forests," Eamon replied, keeping his weapon trained on the group. "They're full of predators. You learn to spot them." He took a step closer, the briefcase. "Put it down slowly." Webb's grip tightened on the handle instead. "Do you have any idea what you're interfering with? This goes so far beyond some buried evidence in a cabin. This is about progress, about economic development that benefits everyone, including the families of the people you killed to hide it." Eamon's voice was steady, but anger simmered beneath the surface. Jenny Martinez was 23 years old. She was an environmental science student trying to document water contamination. How exactly did her murder benefit everyone? The woman by the shredder looked up sharply. "We never intended—" "Shut up, Rebecca." one of the suited men snapped. "Don't say another word." But the dam had broken. Rebecca's face crumpled. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. We were just supposed to bury the reports, make the testing go away. But then that girl kept digging, and Marcus said we had to. She couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah moved closer, her weapon steady. "Rebecca, is it? You want to tell us what really happened?" "The mining permits," Rebecca whispered. "The rare earth deposits under the forest. They're worth hundreds of millions, but the environmental impact studies would have shut everything down. Governor Hartwell needed those campaign contributions, and the mining company needed those permits approved." Webb's face had gone pale. "You stupid." "I'm tired of being scared," Rebecca shouted. "I'm tired of living with what we did. Jenny Martinez didn't deserve to die because she found contaminated water samples." Eamon felt the pieces clicking into place. The cabin hadn't just been a storage site for evidence, it had been Jenny's field research station. She'd been documenting environmental damage from illegal mining operations, building a case that would have exposed the entire conspiracy. When they discovered what she had uncovered, they killed her and tried to bury the evidence along with her body. "Rebecca Chen," Sarah said, producing handcuffs, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice." As the arrests proceeded, Eamon found himself thinking about the forest, about the ancient trees that had witnessed decades of secrets. Justice moved slowly sometimes, but like those trees, it endured. The corruption that had festered in the shadows was finally being dragged into the light. The briefcase Webb had been carrying contained the final pieces of evidence they needed: bank records, communication logs, and most damning of all, a recording of Governor Hartwell explicitly ordering Jenny's death. The warehouse sat like a sleeping giant against the pre-dawn sky, its corrugated metal sides gleaming dully under the sparse streetlights. Eamon crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air as he watched the building through his binoculars. Marcus had been right. This was where they were bringing the evidence, where the final pieces of Judge Kellerman's conspiracy would either be destroyed or used to silence anyone who threatened to expose the truth. 3 black SUVs were parked near the loading dock, their engines still ticking as they cooled. Eamon counted at least 6 men moving around the perimeter, their tactical gear and coordinated movements marking them as professionals. These weren't the same bumbling hired muscle from the forest. Senator Blackwood had called in serious backup. Sarah's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Eamon, I've got eyes on the rear entrance. 2 more guards, but there's a blind spot near the maintenance door on the east side." "Copy that." "FBI units in position?" 5 minutes out. "Agent Torres confirms they have the building surrounded, but they're waiting for your signal." Eamon checked his service weapon and the backup piece strapped to his ankle. The wire Sarah had helped him put on felt bulky against his chest, but it was their insurance policy. Everything that happened in the next hour would be recorded, transmitted directly to FBI headquarters where it couldn't be buried or manipulated. A new set of headlights swept across the warehouse entrance. Eamon watched as a silver sedan pulled up to the loading dock, its occupant stepping out with the careful movements of someone trying to maintain dignity while walking into hell. Senator Blackwood looked older than his campaign photos, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his expensive suit wrinkled. "Our star player just arrived," Eamon whispered into his mic. The warehouse's main door rolled open with a mechanical grinding that echoed across the empty industrial district. Eamon could see figures moving inside, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. "Time to move." He sprinted across the open ground between the containers and the building, using the shadows to mask his approach. The maintenance door Sarah had identified was exactly where she'd said it would be, a simple steel door marked with faded warning signs about authorized personnel only. The lock was old and simple. Eamon's ranger training had included more than just tracking and wilderness survival, and the door clicked open after 30 seconds of careful work with his lockpicks. He slipped inside, finding himself in a narrow corridor lined with electrical panels and ventilation equipment. Voices drifted from the main warehouse floor, angry, urgent conversation punctuated by the sound of boxes being moved. Eamon crept forward until he could see through a grimy window into the warehouse proper. The space was larger than it had appeared from outside, filled with legitimate shipping containers and industrial equipment that provided perfect cover for less legal activities. In the center of the floor, someone had set up what looked like a mobile command center, tables covered with documents, laptop computers, and several cardboard boxes that Eamon recognized from his brief glimpse of the cabin's hidden chamber. Senator Blackwood stood near the tables, his face pale but his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I don't care what it takes. Every piece of evidence, every photograph, every document, it all burns tonight. And I want confirmations that our problem with the park ranger has been permanently resolved." A man in tactical gear nodded. "Team's moving on his location now, sir. The girlfriend, too. Can't leave loose ends." Eamon's blood turned to ice. They were going after Sarah. He keyed his mic, but only got static in return. The warehouse's metal construction was blocking his signal. "What about Judge Kellerman's insurance policy?" Blackwood continued. "The files he kept as leverage?" "Right here, sir." Another figure stepped into view, carrying a metal briefcase. Bank security footage, financial records, the works. 30 years of his little side business, all documented. Blackwood took the briefcase, his hands shaking slightly. "My father was a fool to get involved with him, but I'm not paying for his mistakes anymore." That's when Eamon saw her. Dr. Chen was sitting in a chair near the far wall, zip-tied and gagged but alive. Her presence here meant they'd grabbed her from FBI protective custody, which was either impossible or meant the corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Eamon had heard enough. He triggered the emergency beacon on his belt, hoping the FBI units outside would recognize the signal even if his radio wasn't getting through. Then he started moving toward the main floor, staying low behind a row of shipping containers. The next few minutes would determine whether 30 years of carefully buried secrets would finally see the light of day, or whether everyone who'd tried to expose them would simply disappear into the same darkness that had swallowed Judge Kellerman's victims. The warehouse district looked like a graveyard in the pre-dawn darkness, skeletal cranes reaching toward a sky that hadn't yet decided between night and day. Eamon crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the abandoned textile factory where Marcus Chen had agreed to meet. His radio crackled softly, Agent Rivera confirming the FBI tactical team was in position. 3 weeks had passed since they'd found Senator Whitmore's body in his study, an apparent suicide that fooled no one who knew the truth. The senator's death had triggered a cascade of revelations as other conspirators scrambled to save themselves. Corporate executives, government officials, even a federal judge, all connected to the illegal mining operation that had poisoned 3 counties and killed dozens. But Marcus Chen remained the key, the accountant who'd laundered millions through shell companies, who'd arranged payments to silence victims' families, who knew every dirty detail of the conspiracy that had started with a simple land grab 20 years ago. A black sedan pulled into the lot. Chen emerged alone, as promised, clutching a briefcase that contained the final piece of evidence they needed: bank records linking the mining company's profits directly to a network of politicians who'd blocked environmental investigations for 2 decades. Eamon spoke into his throat mic. Target acquired. Moving in. He stepped from the shadows, his service weapon drawn but lowered. Chen saw him approach and nodded nervously. The accountant looked like he'd aged a decade in the past month. Hollow cheeks, trembling hands, the haunted expression of a man who'd finally understood the true cost of his silence. "You came alone," Chen said, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of highway traffic. "My backup's here," Eamon replied, "just not visible." "You have the records?" Chen lifted the briefcase. "Everything. 20 years of payments, every transaction, every cover-up. Enough to bring down half the state legislature." He paused, scanning the empty lot. "After this, I'm dead, aren't I? Even in witness protection, they'll find me." "Not if we move fast enough," Eamon said, though they both knew the odds. The conspiracy had tentacles reaching into law enforcement, the courts, even federal agencies. Trust was a luxury neither of them could afford. A sound made them both freeze, the distant rumble of approaching vehicles, too many vehicles. Chen's face went white. "You set me up," he whispered. "No." Emon's mind raced. The tactical team was supposed to be silent, invisible until the exchange was complete. This was something else. Black SUVs poured into the lot from 3 directions, their headlights creating a blinding web of illumination. Doors slammed, voices shouted commands. But these weren't FBI agents. Emon could tell by their movements, their equipment, their coordinated precision that spoke of private military training. "Run!" Emon grabbed Chen's arm, pulling him toward the factory entrance. "Rivera, we're compromised. They found us." Static answered him. His radio was being jammed. They reached the factory door as the first shots rang out, suppressed weapons spitting death across the asphalt. Emon kicked in the rusted door and shoved Chen inside, following him into the maze of abandoned machinery and collapsed walkways. How did they know? Chen gasped as they stumbled through the darkness. Emon's blood ran cold as the answer hit him. Someone on the task force was feeding information to the conspiracy. Someone who'd known about tonight's meet from the beginning. More gunfire erupted behind them, professional, methodical. These weren't thugs hired off the street. This was a cleanup crew, the same kind that had probably silenced a dozen other witnesses over the years. They climbed a rickety staircase to the factory's 2nd level. Chen clutched the briefcase like a lifeline, which in many ways it was. If those records disappeared, the entire investigation collapsed. The guilty would walk free, the victims would remain forgotten, and the forest where this all began would continue yielding its poisonous secrets. Through a broken window, Emon saw muzzle flashes in the darkness. The tactical team was fighting back, but they were outnumbered and caught off guard. How many good agents would die tonight because of his investigation? How many more would die if it failed? There, Chen pointed to a loading dock on the building's far side. "We can get out that way." They moved through the shadows, stepping carefully around debris and rusted machinery. Behind them, voices echoed through the factory as the kill team spread out, hunting them room by room. Emon thought about Sarah Hendricks, the first victim whose bones he'd found beneath that cabin's floorboards. She'd been fighting this same conspiracy 20 years ago when they'd silenced her. Tonight, in this crumbling factory, her fight would finally end, one way or another. The loading dock was 50 feet away when spotlights blazed to life outside, turning the broken windows into sheets of white fire. They were surrounded. Chen looked at him with desperate eyes. "The briefcase," he whispered. "Whatever happens to us, the truth has to survive."